So I'll give you the background story. Again, I was 19 and 20 years old when there suddenly was this really big push for women to get the Gardasil vaccine, which was a 3-part series. And I'm going to show you an old commercial from that time because the message that was being delivered was that if you wanted to avoid getting cancer, you would get this vaccine. Like one way that you could mark yourself safe from cervical cancer was to get the Gardasil vaccine. So I'll give you the background story. Again, I was 19 and 20 years old when there suddenly was this really big push for women to get the Gardasil vaccine, which was a 3-part series. And I'm going to show you an old commercial from that time because the message that was being delivered was that if you wanted to avoid getting cancer, you would get this vaccine. Like one way that you could mark yourself safe from cervical cancer was to get the Gardasil vaccine.
Alrighty, what's going on? Candace Owens, that's what's going on. What we're going to do today is look at Candace jumping on the anti-vax train, which portrays our governments, the governments of the world, as evil entities colluding with Big Pharma to crush our freedoms and afflict us with diseases. But we're not going to be talking about the vaccine that cannot be named. No, we're going to be talking about the Gardasil vaccine, which is a vaccine for preventing certain strains of human papillomavirus, otherwise known as HPV. Here's a bit of background. The HPV strains that Gardasil protects against are sexually transmitted, and 2 of the types it protects against cause 70% of cervical cancers and most HPV-induced anal, vulva, vagina, and penile cancers. They also cause 90% of genital warts. Basically, these strains are nasty, and Gardasil does a very good job, a damn good job, of protecting against them. As of April 2014, more than 170 million doses of Gardasil have been distributed worldwide, and you won't be surprised to learn that the US Food and Drug Administration and the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention consider the vaccine to be completely safe. But not according to Candace Owens. No, not at all.
Here is one such commercial from back then.
Each year in the U.S., thousands of women learn they have cervical cancer. I could be one less.
One less statistic. One less.
Because now there's Gardasil, the only vaccine that may help protect you from the 4 types of human papillomavirus that may cause 70% of cervical cancer.
The first thing to notice is that this advert does not say that the vaccine is against cervical cancer, as Candace claimed at the beginning.
One way that you could mark yourself safe from cervical cancer was to get the Gardasil vaccine.
Rather, it says that it's against 4 types of HPV that have been shown to cause 70% of cervical cancers.
The only vaccine that may help protect you from the 4 types of human papillomavirus that may cause 70% of cervical cancer.
Hence, Candace is mistaken from the get-go. She's setting the stage for Gardasil claiming one thing when in fact it claims another.
So I saw these commercials, obviously, like every other young woman, and I fully trusted my doctors just like every other young woman. And I went to my gynecologist and for my annual exam, and he said, there's a new vaccine and you absolutely have to get it.
I suppose it's possible that Candace's doctor said that she absolutely has to get the vaccine, but it's also possible that he highly recommended it. It's hard to tell with these kind of personal anecdotes. I will say this though, considering just how wrong Candace is on so many other things, it wouldn't surprise me if she's wrong about her doctor. But let's assume, because it's the fair thing to do here, that she's correct that her doctor said that she absolutely has to take the vaccine.
And I said, what is it? He said, Gardasil. It's good. It's going to prevent you from getting cancer down the line. Now that I'm older, what a strange thing. We don't have a cure to cancer. Why would I believe that we have something that can just fully, a shot that could prevent you from getting cancer?
Yes, Candace just said what you think she said. Her doctor told her that this vaccine prevents certain types of HPV that cause cervical cancer, and she took her doctor to be saying that the vaccine prevents cervical cancer altogether. But now that she's an adult, she knows that her doctor wasn't telling the truth, and her reasoning is that since we don't have a cure for cancer, it's silly to think that we have ways to prevent cancer. This is ridiculous. It's outrageous. It's incredibly dangerous.
Now that I'm older, what a strange thing. We don't have a cure to cancer. Why would I believe that we have something that can just fully, a shot that could prevent you from getting cancer?
It's as though Candace has gone to her doctor, and her doctor has told her to drink more water to prevent kidney stones. And now, years on, in the Daily Wire studio, Candace is making a video saying that she should have suspected her doctor for saying that there's a way to prevent kidney stones, since we don't have a cure for kidney stones.
Now it presents so many red flags, but at the time I was young and I was dumb.
When you was dumb. Okay. Alright.
The Gardasil shot was approved back in 2006. So again, I think I was about 19 years old when this happened.
Alright, so I'm going to skip a few minutes here to save you some time. Candace speaks about her traumatic experience receiving the vaccine, noting that upon receiving the first shot, she passed out.
Immediately after he administered it, I hit the ground and I passed out.
And for the second shot, she says that she was half naked, passed out, vomited, and she assumes that she had a seizure.
And this time, my reaction was much more severe. Not only did I pass out, and I remember this moment especially horrifically because she had asked me to disrobe because afterwards I was going to have an exam. So I was essentially just wearing a shirt and one of those little pieces of paper, to cover your parts. And I had passed out, fallen off of the chair, or the table rather, that I was on. And when I came to, I began having what can only be described as a mini seizure. I began shaking and I began vomiting profusely.
This is all anecdotal, and I find the claim of them getting her to prepare for a gynecological exam only to be given a completely unrelated vaccine before the exam itself to be very implausible. But let's talk about her side effects. It's true, of course, that many of our greatest vaccines and drugs can cause pretty serious side effects. Paracetamol is a good example of this. It can cause a whole load of very negative effects. But just like Gardasil, serious effects are rare. And just as doctors will tell you not to use very common medicine if you have a negative effect, what did Candace's doctor do when they realised that she was having a negative effect? Yeah, they told her not to get the third dose.
And he said to me right away that you should discontinue the series.
So they recognise that she's one of the rare people that has a severe reaction, and because of this, they discontinued her. This is completely normal, but for Candace, they gave her reason to doubt all medical authorities.
Why would I just blanket trust a doctor?
Candace then started doing her own research, first noting the cervical cancer cases before they rolled out the vaccine in 2006, and she boasts of not using any shady sources.
Again, we are not going to use any shady sources.
And then she compares these numbers with cases from today.
Now, they've essentially decided, Big Pharma all by itself, that this vaccine is so successful that they have now not just said it's for women, it's now for men.
Really, Candace? Big Pharma decided this all by themselves? Or was it, all the scientific research showing that Gardasil also protects males from HPV? Now, notice the framing here. Candace is saying that Big Pharma simply decided this all by themselves, as if it's only to make money. She isn't even considering that they've based this recommendation on scientific literature. She's just pulling an incredulous face. Damn, Big Pharma, you are so damn stupid, and yet so damn powerful. How do you do it?
So if you're watching this now, you're like, what are you talking about, Candace? What do you mean just for women with cervical cancer? Men are getting this vaccine too. Yeah, eventually they decided to extend it to men, which was confusing to me because, again, that big push, which you just saw in the commercial, was all about women preventing themselves from cervical cancer. So how did they magically realize this formula was also going to help men if a man does not have a cervix?
The incredulity is strong in this one, huh? Candace is claiming foul play because the advert was targeting females, and yet now they, the government, Big Pharma, etc., additionally recommend the vaccine to males. This is as vacuous as concluding that the recommendation of cognitive behavioural therapy to females to prevent suicide is foul play because most adverts target males, who have a higher rate of self-deleting. Before moving on, notice that Candace hasn't made clear to her audience that Gardasil protects against sexually transmitted HPV strains, and so her audience doesn't know about this crucial factor. If they did know about this, then they would realise that males can probably get the virus too, and indeed they can spread it, which of course is all true. And if Candace's audience knew this, then they wouldn't be surprised at all to hear that trials have been shown to be effective on males as well as females.
It's very confusing to me. It doesn't matter. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor.
Well, that's certainly true. We can agree on that. Candace is not a scientist, and she is not a doctor. She is either smooth-brained,
I felt like my brain didn't work the same since getting that vaccine,
or deliberately spreading misinformation that causes the most vulnerable in society to reject protection.
So just trust them. So what they say to men is that this could prevent you from getting penile cancer, which is just not even on the map of cancers that men can get. I mean, I will get into that later.
Even if penile cancer wasn't worth even considering, and well done for so quickly discarding men's health, Candace, by protecting males, we protect females, since males spread the disease. Surely this isn't that hard to understand. Or is it?
But just know that they have now extended this to men. So that must mean that it was such a astounding success for the female population that they said, men, you should get this as well.
Again, Candace's narrative building is utterly absurd. She's selling the narrative that Big Pharma said, hey, this is such an effective prevention of cervical cancer that we just assume that it also prevents penile cancer. What a fucking joke this woman is. Like, why does anyone take this person seriously? If they were simply trying to force men to have it, don't you think that they would simply decide that it prevents testicular cancer or some other cancer that's far more prevalent in males? Prostate, maybe.
So let's fact check how successful the Gardasil shot was for females. So these numbers are from 2022. In 2022, there were 167.5 million females living in the United States, okay? Of the 167.5 million females living in the United States, there were 14,100 cases of cervical cancer.
To test Candace's reasoning, let's jointly apply her method to another topic. In 2022, there were 10,194 suicides by females in the United States, less than those that got cervical cancer. But if we had a vaccine, a program, or frankly anything that could dramatically reduce those suicides with little to no side effects, do you think that Candace would be here building the narrative that she is? Would she be demonizing such an effective protection?
Now, the math on that means that if you were in a female in the United States, and this is after almost 20 years of having, almost 2 decades of having this wonderful vaccine to prevent from cervical cancer, your chances of getting cervical cancer today are 0.0084%. That's weird because that means that cervical cancer rates have gone slightly up in the United States since the rollout of the Gardasil vaccine.
Again, Gardasil does not prevent all cervical cancer cases. It shields against various strains of the HPV virus, which together cause 70% of cervical cancer cases. Also, in order for Candace to make any point here, she needs to have information on those 14,000 people, right? I mean, what percentage of them took the vaccine? Without this information, she can't make any claim about its efficacy. It could well be the case, in fact, that all 14,000 of them had anti-vax parents. Now, contrary to what Candace is suggesting here, there's actually been a massive reduction in cervical cancer among vaccinated women. Candace is making out that the vaccine isn't supported, so let me read a few words from a cancer website. While it's true that there's been a slight increase in cervical cancer cases over the last 10 years, this isn't true of younger females who are getting the vaccine. In addition to this being the case for the US, in the UK they found that cases of cervical cancer were 87% less likely in females who were eligible for the vaccine when they were aged 12 or 13, when compared to similar females who were not offered the vaccine. 87%. Likewise, in Sweden, an 11-year study found that females vaccinated before the age of 17 had nearly a 90% reduction in cervical cancer incidences. The nonsense that Candace is spewing here is dangerous. It's dangerous misinformation for political clout.
How does that make sense? By what metric are they determining that this Gardasil vaccine, which has injured so many women, myself included, should not be discontinued and rather should be extended to the entire male population?
What metric, you ask? How about all the evidence that you're omitting? That's the metric. Gardasil has been tested on tens of millions of females since its invention, and serious side effects are very, very rare. Now, as to Candace's question of why it's recommended to males as well as females, it's because 1, it helps prevent HPV strains in males that can cause issues, and 2, it stops males from getting the virus, which, guess what, stops males from giving it to females. Or maybe it's all just a grand conspiracy to rob you of your liberty of earning a timely Darwin Award. You choose, because evidently we're just going to ignore science here at the Daily Wire. That's what we do, we just ignore it. Oh, well, unless it favours us.
And if you think that's shady, that they've extended it to the male population because now they've decided that it can help with penile cancer and all sorts of cancers, then you're going to find it even stranger that they're now mandating the shot. The HPV shot, they are mandating it in Rhode Island, in DC, in Puerto Rico, in Virginia, and then by the way, just in DC and Virginia, it's for girls only. And parents can only opt out if they have a religious or moral belief against it. But in New York, this is where it gets absolutely insane. They attempted to pass a bill in 2019 to require that all children have to have the Gardasil vaccine to enter any school, including daycare.
Let's pause here to figure out whether Candace is either a little dim or insidiously manipulative. She's making out that toddlers are being given the injection. She even said daycare, when in fact the bill is aiming at children entering the 7th grade, so that's 12 to 13-year-olds. And guess what? The vaccine is shown to be the most effective when it's given to children under the age of 17. And guess what happens when children hit puberty? Many of them become sexually active. We don't want them to, but they do. It's just a fact of life. Hence, this is where Gardasil is the most effective. And as for Candace being upset with the government forcing such things, is she equally outraged of the government forcing chlorine in water supplies to prevent cholera? Is she appalled by the government forcing sanitation in public areas? Is she triggered by alcohol and drug regulations? Is the FDA her arch enemy because they won't let companies put Coke in children's drinks? Was she devastated by the elimination of smallpox? Was this a bad day, a terrible day for America?
To say that that infuriates me would be the greatest understatement because of how I suffered that vaccine. When you are injured from a vaccine and then you learn that they are trying to give this vaccine to toddlers, it is a kind of evil that I can't even put into words.
You know, what I think is evil is making out that those that are genuinely helping millions of women are evil, when they're not. And if we want to talk about side effects, why not consider dentistry? Every single time you go to the dentist, you come away with some temporary problems, often pain and discomfort, and yet no one would argue that this means that we shouldn't force children to have dental care, would they? Or consider the BCG vaccine, which gave me and everyone else a dead arm for a week, and left scar tissue. However, it has given me protection against tuberculosis.
When I know that just amongst my friends, how many people have had a bad reaction to Gardasil. Some people didn't. My sister didn't, by the way, as one example. But to think that they would, with, again, no metric of success that they can point to, demand that children get this vaccine drives me insane.
No metric. None. What planet are you on, Candace? When you say no metric, do you mean that you haven't looked at any? What the
It drives me up a wall. Now, let's also be clear that it doesn't say that this is going to prevent all cervical cancers. They're talking specifically about HPV, right? HPV is an STD that they claim can lead to cervical cancer.
Right. Finally, Candace admitted that the vaccine is against HPV rather than cervical cancer as a whole. Now then, let's hope that she doesn't say something stupid.
And this vaccine is a vaccine against HPV, a sexually transmitted disease. So I'm going to ask you to explain to me why children in daycare would be taking a vaccine against HPV, which is a sexually transmitted disease.
Stop saying it's for toddlers. Actually read the damn thing rather than just its glossary. Now, as for why we give it to people before they're sexually active, I shouldn't have to explain this. But this is Candace Owens, and so I will. The vaccine is preventative. That means that it needs to be issued before you contract the disease. Getting outraged because children receive this vaccine before they're sexually active is as moronic as getting outraged because your doctor advised you to get a vaccine for dengue fever before you visited certain countries.
What are they concerned about with HPV? You want to know something else about HPV? According to the CDC's website, for HPV, the sexually transmitted disease, which I had never heard of until they suddenly wanted me to take the Gardasil shot. We didn't learn about HPV in school at the time that I was in school until the Gardasil shot. Then we all started hearing about it.
What is Candace's reasoning here? Is it that since her school didn't tell her about the HPV virus before recommending that she gets the vaccine, that it's all a conspiracy? How does her mind work?
Well, for 90% of individuals, HPV clears up without any treatment at all. whatever miraculous STD. You don't even need to treat it. 90% of the time, it clears up all on its own.
But what if the 10% who don't have it clear up on its own? 10% is still a large number of people. To pivot, for comparison, take, for instance, pneumonia in those that are aged 65 to 84. Only 16.1% die. Still, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage them to get the influenza jab, does it? Getting back to HPV, it's worth noting its epidemiology. There were 43 million HPV infections in 2018, and in that same year, there were 13 million new infections. And so, while the chances of each case sorting itself out is high, the amount of times the dice are being rolled is a major issue. Put it this way, if I told you that 99% of cholera cases clear up on their own, would you be happy drinking from an untreated water source several times a day over a period of decades? Really? Yeah, I didn't think so.
But it doesn't matter because they now want children.
Again, by children, she means toddlers. She means children in daycare, 2 to 3 year olds. But the actual thing that she put on screen reveals that it's 11 to 12 year olds.
Who I would hope are not sexually active to get this vaccine, which is potentially going to prevent them from getting sorts of cancers that have actually increased by rate in this country since the rollout of this vaccine.
Again, it hasn't increased among young people. That is, those that got the vaccine. The UK reports an 87% reduction in females, and Sweden reports a 90% reduction. Candace is simply and smugly incorrect here, and it's dangerous. This is very dangerous misinformation.
Does any of that make sense to you? What sort of politicians would put up a bill trying to require all children to have this vaccine to enter school?
You giant prune, it doesn't say that. It's not... Why have they got no vetting at the Daily Wire? Why do you produce everything? Why do you just let your... do you care about truth at all? Is it just, if you can make your enemy look bad, fucking say anything?
Who is in their pocket would be the right question. Who is lobbying for this? I think the answer is going to be Big Pharma, because what is clear to me is that this wasn't about health. If this was about health and this was about determining the success of a product that was on the market, Gardasil would be revoked.
Because everything is just one giant conspiracy, isn't it? Yep, it has nothing to do with saving lives. All of the evidence from multiple institutes across the world are all in on a single grand conspiracy. Seriously, can someone develop a vaccine for stupidity? Please do it. We need it. We need it quite badly. But then again, the stupid wouldn't take it, would they? Checkmate.
I felt like my brain didn't work the same since getting that vaccine.
On the topic of profitability, did you know that vaccines are one of the least profitable products for Big Pharma? As Thomas Eschner writes in his book, Anti-Vaccination and Vaccine Hesitancy, why would pharmaceutical companies engage in a wide-reaching, theoretically expensive and time-consuming international conspiracy to protect what amounts to only 2 to 3% of the worldwide pharmaceutical sector? Also, if vaccines result in roughly 3% profit margins for the pharmaceutical sector, there is not a vast money-making surplus for doctors and governments to cash in on, even if they were colluding with Big Pharma. Furthermore, as researchers have shown, doctors are often losing capital by administrating vaccines. There is little monetary incentive for medical practitioners to vaccinate patients, aside from ensuring the health of their communities that they serve. The myth that vaccines are major money makers for Big Pharma, government and doctors proves to be shaky ground upon which many anti-vaccination conspiracy narratives are built. I mean, just think about it. If you wanted to make money, as a doctor, you don't want to vaccinate people. What you want to do is make sure they get ill. And then you want a situation where you can sell them, the cure once it's too late. And if you do want to make money with a vaccine, well, you tell your patient that they need a booster every year or so, don't you? You don't just say that they need 3 of them when they're 12 and that's it. This entire conspiracy doesn't make any sense. None of the evidence out there favors it whatsoever. Why are you taking this crap seriously? Like, seriously, if you like Candace, why are you taking this seriously?
But nope, it's not. Instead, you will come across people that recommend that your children get it.
And that, my fellow apes, is Candace Owens for you. She makes sweeping errors and or spreads deliberate misinformation in order to weave a grand conspiratorial narrative that spans entire continents. She labels those who genuinely are saving lives as malevolent, all while she encourages disdain for these crucial life-saving services. And you know, it's sad that she won't be receiving the Darwin Award for her behaviour. Instead, it's the unfortunate fate of many underprivileged children that's going to pay the price for her, as their parents heed the advice of this arrogant individual lacking wisdom, humility, and dare I say, decency. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to everyone who supports the channel. We cannot create content like this. I am building a team, I'm trying to make sure that we've got several people working on things, we're stretching ourselves thin, so if there's any of you that want to join, by supporting us for just $1 a month, whatever works, we'd really appreciate it. But what I'm driving at here is that we cannot create this content without you, and that you make a huge difference. So thank you, really appreciate it. Catch you in the next one.